Welcome in to another edition of the JMU Sports News Podcast. I am Bennett Conlon, joined by Jack Fitzpatrick. Jack, you attended the first day of JMU football camp today.
Folks, JMU football is back. According to all the beat reporters who were there last season, I was not one of them. Vibes were apparently very different than what they were this year. Music blasting over the speakers, coaches dancing, yelling, screaming, jumping up and down. It felt a little bit party-esque from the coaches, not so much necessarily from the players. First day back, heat. It's a little tough when you're a player, but the coaches were loving it. The vibes were high, and it was a good time to get out there to camp. First time we've ever been invited to camp.
Yeah, look at us making moves. We're excited to cover the program. Should be an exciting year. I know I'm excited to hear from you about what we've got going on. A lot of excitement.
Exciting stuff. And you know what else is really exciting?
Oh,
Bet Online, because it's the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE. That's promo code BLEAV for 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet Online, where the game starts. Quattro on our YouTube channel commented, great first question, by the way, Jack. Love the effort. I did think that was hilarious. Waited 6 years. We're finally given the opportunity to cover this team. And I've asked so many questions to coaches, and I just fumbled that one. And I got the classic, can you reframe that?
Chesney almost answered it though. But hey,
I'm glad he reframed it, because the reframing of it did give us some really interesting answers. I guess that's an answer we can kind of dive in right here. This is from that question that Quattro described, kind of talking about how this team throughout camp can manage injuries as they have a month until their first game at Charlotte.
Guys are as healthy as they can be on August 31st.
Well, yeah, so if you're talking all the way to August 31st, there's a whole lot that goes into that, right? So there's a lot of sports science that we're employing, from GPSs to undulations within practice periods to coaches. You'll notice in some of their indies, they don't move. They're working on something where it's just, there's no volume. They're not adding volume because we're looking for peaks and valleys throughout this practice to mimic the peaks and valleys that you'll get in game. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do, on top of hitting top speeds, not overusing anybody. And then we have iPads on the sideline that when someone starts to redline, we understand that. So as far as volume injuries from overworked, that's the two things you don't want to do on game one when you show up, because you don't want to show up out of shape because you get exposed, but you don't want to show up overworked and tired because you get exposed, right? And that, finding that exact perfect medium is what we're operating within. Contact injuries are going to happen. That's nothing, that we're just going to live with those as they show up. We got to be smart as when we contact, how we contact, and did we lay the proper foundation within our practice without helmets on and those things, to understand how to stay up, how to keep your face out of it, how to do things the right way. That enables you then to practice safely even when you go live.
Yeah, so injuries, something that are going to happen, is kind of what Bob Chesney was saying there, head coach Bob Chesney. Something that they are working on is the non-contact injuries, using sports science, using all of this data that they now have at their fingertips to see when a guy maybe isn't practicing his very best or practicing to his normal levels, his baseline. And before he even knows that he may have dipped, they can make sure that, he can come off the field, get some rest that might be needed, and they can mimic some of these things in a game and do some really amazing things with sports science. We'll talk a little bit more about that as the show goes on once Bennett returns. Before we dive too far into camp, because I know I'm chomping at the bit to get in there to talk all things day one JMU football camp. Looking ahead to Charlotte, I want to touch on a little bit of that. Charlotte opens their camp on Friday. We do have some more housekeeping stuff to get through. Check us out on YouTube. Like and subscribe over on our YouTube channel. If you're watching this stream on our YouTube, thank you for tuning in. If you're watching on our Twitter or Facebook, thank you for tuning in. And if you're listening on the podcast version of that. Also, thank you for tuning in. All of you can like and subscribe our YouTube. We just dropped a new Dukes recruits interview with the newest commit of the class of 2025. He's an absolute speedster, Josiah Persinger. He sat down with Bennett earlier today and talked about his journey to deciding on JMU. He had some Power 5, some Group of 5 offers, some big-time offers. I believe Wake was in there as well, but he ended up choosing JMU. The Salem, Virginia native knows Chauncey Logan, and wouldn't be surprised if that may have helped a little bit of the decision-making process as well. If you're also looking to potentially sponsor the podcast, do any advertising with us, our lines are open. Check us out. You can check out our website, jmusportsnews.com, under the advertising tab at the bottom of the page. You can reach out to us that way, or you can email us, jmusportsnews@gmail.com, if you want to sponsor, or if you have anyone that you think we should reach out to try and sponsor the podcast. We're looking, it's that time of the off season, looking to get some more sponsors on board for next year. Bennett, you're back. We've plugged the YouTube. We've plugged our advertising, trying to whore ourselves out. I will say Bennett also wrote a fantastic article today.
Thank you.
We'll talk about it a little bit in listener questions, because it started as a listener question. I think it got Bennett's mind going, and he decided to write a whole article. We also have 3 questions we're watching as fall camp unfolds live over on jmusportsnews.com. Fully redesigned website. We're pumped about it. We're excited about it. And just as excited as we are for JMU football, it's here. I played a clip while you were gone, trying to see if that could have, gotten you back in time. It couldn't, but it talked about the sports science. We dove right into the question I messed up, the question I fumbled, but the answer was fantastic from head coach Bob Chesney.
Big sports science guy.
Was that your takeaway from that clip?
Yeah, he seems like he's really into like sports science and running things like an NFL training camp and all these things. And we're starting to get sort of, I guess, little tidbits of what that actually means. But he's monitoring hydration pretty well. I assume they're keeping track of like heart rate, that sort of thing, based on what he said, which a lot of teams do with like those kind of Catapult or other brands.
It was Catapult.
Catapult, okay. Those other trackers, which tell you sort of everyone's vital signs and things like that, and you can compare that to previous practices or whatever. He obviously wants to get their heart rate up and get them pushing themselves, but you want to do it within a certain limit. So if guys get too high, you can shut them down. You can make sure they're getting high enough so they're getting enough work. But that's pretty fascinating. I'm sure they had access to some stuff like this during Curt Cignetti's time there. I don't know how much it was used or how much he cared. It might have been something he just didn't talk about, because I know he has mentioned before, right? He talked about Dallison hitting like 21 miles an hour on the Catapult, like in a game setting. So they were clearly using it in some capacity. I just don't know how much it really meant to Cignetti. But Chesney seems like he's all in on that kind of stuff, which is interesting, if nothing else.
Yeah, they're trying to recreate the peaks and valleys you have in a game. And I think it's really interesting because you can see when a guy is maybe not performing his best, or he's like about to overexert himself, and you can pull him out of practice. Like you said, you can ramp him down, try to save him from getting soft tissue issues. Were big time these last few off season with JMU football. This might be a way to maybe avoid some soft tissue injuries, maybe some just weird creaks and cracks that pop up when you're overworked and you continue pushing yourself maybe a little bit too much. This is a good way to kind of make sure that you're not taking any injuries that aren't needed. You're going to get injuries in contact. You're going to get injuries when you put on the pads, which I think that's the first time I've ever heard a coach be like, yeah, they're going to get injured.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, when we start contacting, there's not much you can do to avoid that. So what you can, it's like a coach speak, control the controllables. And in this time when you can control it, maybe try and figure out as much as you can to avoid those injuries.
Seems smart, seems intentional. I think everything, at least my sort of takeaway, everything Chesney's saying in the offseason makes a lot of sense. He seems like a very engaging personality. The way he runs a practice seems like it would be engaging for a college athlete. It's right. It's on paper and sort of what you're seeing in the practices. It all makes sense. Of course, every coach though is actually judged on what happens in the field, on the field during games. And that's where
not Coach Primetime. He's judged on more.
except for Coach Prime. But everyone else, like Signetti, right? I don't know how much sports science he did, but when you're 10-0 to start a season, nobody cares. So I am interested to see how this sort of plays out within the season, if it translates to wins or if there's, maybe more of a learning curve in year one for Chesney at the FBS level.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Yeah, so where do you want to go with this? I kind of hijacked the beginning of this episode going the injuries. I was trying to give you some time to come
It
back
took a
after your
while to
Wi-Fi.
restart. We'll see what happens.
Where do you want to go from here?
You were at camp, so let's go back to you. Key takeaways, whether it's players that stood out, things that stood out. What stood out from actually being in Harrisonburg?
Yeah, something that stood out a lot was, and I think Jacob Dobbs talked about this a lot at Media Day when he was kind of hyping up his teammates. A guy that stood out that I was shocked to see stand out was Jordan Taylor, defensive back, Division II transfer from Tusculum. Dude's got some solid speed. You didn't see a lot of speed today because there wasn't a lot of workouts that were, long distance sprints, but he's got some ball skills. Picked off Billy Atkins in one of their quick rounds of kind of going against each other. But when they were doing their reps, you cover your teammate back and forth, you turn, and then there's a ball thrown directly at you, coming at you real quick. He was the only one to catch it both times. Chauncey, I think Chauncey may have caught it both times too, but a lot of the corners were struggling to get that catch. They were good at deflecting it down, but he was the only one that consistently looked like a wide receiver making that catch. So he really stood out. And that's a defensive back room, specifically a cornerback room, where there's a lot of competition for boundary corner. It seems that the field corner, that cornerback one, is likely going to be filled with Chauncey Logan going into his third year. He'll probably fill that role, but the boundary corner, Phil Steele's preview had Terrence Spence there, the FCS transfer, but it really could be any guy there. Then watch some of the safeties. Safeties looked pretty good. Saw Ben Hofer's guy, Chase Regan. He was doing work, doing some good stuff there. And then I also watched a lot of the quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan Morris is very solid. Also, real quick, we've talked about this before. Alonzo Barnett warming up pre-UVA last year. You're like, whoa, that guy's got it. And then in the game, he didn't have it against Bucknell. But in the warm-ups today, I was like, let me see what Bennett's talking about. And I watched him throw a pass, and I was like, that's some zip.
He has a rocket launcher of an arm. Like the warm-ups last year at UVA, it's McLeod was kind of lofting these balls, which is sort of what he does. McLeod isn't like necessarily, if he's throwing a ball 15 yards, it's not like a dart.
Yeah.
He places it well and throws a nice, accurate, deep ball. But Alonzo's got some arm strength. So he is a really fascinating prospect to keep an eye on, it, if nothing else, because he is super talented. But yeah, as you're saying, it didn't translate onto the field last year against Bucknell.
Yeah, the redshirt sophomore has a lot of hope. But Dylan Morris also has a zinger of a pass. Great footwork. Does have an interesting delivery. Almost bends his wrist and flicks it. Very interesting. Very unorthodox. But he looked very good. He looked like the best quarterback out of the ones warming up.
That makes sense, right? He's got the experience. It would be a shock if he didn't start against Charlotte in week 1. Played a lot at Washington, was really good when he did see the field, then got beat out by a Heisman Trophy runner-up or a winner if you're Chesney's voting system. So I feel really good about the offense as a whole going into camp.
I agree. And then a third guy that stood out to me, I was talking with Daniel Merriman, who was also there covering with JMU Sports News, and we were talking about Penny. I was like, where is he? Turn around, watching him do one of his routes. Partially the cornerback fell. Partially he kind of burned him on an out route. Pass was low, inaccurate, wasn't on target, so Penny didn't make the catch. But I turn around and go, oh, there's Penny. Oh, he just burned someone. All right. And I was like, all right, he's going to be good. Because they were talking about Dylan Williams potentially getting wide receiver 3 reps. And he looks good. 88, big guy, has a good frame. I just don't see how he breaks into this wide receiver lineup. You got Tajee Hudson, Cam Ross. I think Penny is going to be very good. You had an awesome breakdown of him over on our YouTube. Dollison is there.
Mm-hmm.
Although I didn't see Dollison. I couldn't, not that You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
all these
sometimes
new
it's hard when
numbers,
there's a million
and you're
people.
like,
Yeah,
and you don't know how it's all vibing. So, but
definitely.
just
Yeah,
wanted to throw that
definitely
out
worth keeping an eye on that position group. We might be a year early. Some JMU fans on the Dylan Williams hype.
there. I agree. Perfect time for Bennett to cut out again. Let's see if he comes back. Appears right now he is not. Daniel Merriman in the comments said Demo Dylan Morris's timing with receivers was okay, but could get better. Accuracy was very solid for day one. Day one, I'm not necessarily looking for, what that timing is, what that chemistry is with the receivers. He was here for spring ball, so there is a little bit of that. But I'm not too worried about the timing right there. Accuracy was good. Footwork was good, as Daniel pointed out when we were watching them together. And he looked really solid overall. And Daniel, he's still on the Dylan Williams train. He has Williams starting by week 5 as wide receiver 3 or better. Crazy hands and stellar athlete. Daniel, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this one, because you know who also has crazy hands and is a stellar athlete? Taji Hudson, Cam Ross, Breon Penny, Omarion Dollison.
That's going to be a hard one to break into. I agree with you on that.
I think we're a year ahead on Dylan Williams. I think a redshirt year, he can break out next year as a redshirt freshman. I think he'll be very, very good. Heck, he could be this year. If I'm eating my words in week 5 and he's wide receiver, he'd probably be wide receiver 2, because he's not going to really fit in as a wide receiver 3 slot guy. That's going to be Cam Ross the whole year, depending on how you vibe it out. But I hope I'm eating my words on him. But I hope that means they have 5 wide receivers who are producing at insane levels.
A lot of talent in the receiver room, lots of unproven talent. But I do think like Penny gets underrated, where like Taji Hudson's viewed as like almost like locked to be really good. He has 9 career catches in college. Penny had like 26 last year in a bad passing offense. Like he's produced more at the receiver position in college than Hudson has. I think he's probably one that's really underrated just because he came in during the spring portal session. So nobody talked about him specifically in the spring because he wasn't in Harrisonburg. So guys like Williams and some others got some, I guess, love from the media, things like that. But like Penny's produced, he's very good.
Penny may be wide receiver 1.
He could definitely come into a pretty big role for the Dukes, I think.
Yeah. Let's throw it over quickly to some opening comments from head coach Bob Chesney post-practice, day 1 of JMU camp.
I think it went great. I don't know that many coaches stand here after day 1 and be like, that was awful. But there were things that obviously these guys have been doing a lot on their own over the summer that we haven't seen. So what habits have they developed, and what do we have to break? Those are questions ultimately, when that football comes out. So a couple things forced in there today. I thought defense, did a really good job of flying around. I thought there were some, obviously some guys in the secondary that we didn't see in the spring making a bunch of plays, and I thought the D-line, those 2 areas were our areas we knew we needed to bulk up a little bit, and I thought those 2, certainly showed up today.
Bennett, I got to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Is it worrisome that the defense is so far ahead, that the defense is out there flying around?
No, I certainly don't think so.
Bob Chesney answered that exact question.
Should the defense be ahead of the offense right now?
It always, yeah, it's usually always works. Is that defense flies around, gets to the ball. They don't have to. They execute on sheer hustle right now. And I think that usually have an advantage when you get to the part where offense needs to click, the timing, the routes, who ran it, how many reps have I had with that exact guy at that depth, and is he a rotation shorter than the other guy or takes a little bit longer? Those are all the things that in time we begin to figure out. So yeah, there's a lot more that goes to the sort of synergy of an offense where defense hustle and effort will get you a long way.
Hustle and effort will get you a long way.
Early on, still working through some stuff. So yeah, I guess the defense just getting to the spot faster gives them a little edge. I don't think Carter Sweezy's going to break into the wide receiver 3 discussion based on sort of his inability to go up and get that, deep ball in the background. Why is he running around?
I have no idea. Also, did you see Joby Mallory in the background?
Big dude.
Just a massive man.
Running back room, man, it's intriguing. But yeah, defense ahead of the offense. Not a huge surprise there. That all checks out. Day one of camp, very standard day one of camp stuff, I think.
It was very standard day one of camp. I mean, you get in there and you're like, I want to ask about the running back room, how it's shaping out. How are they expecting the offensive line to play? Then you realize, oh, this is like the first time they're kind of seeing this team too, because it's been all off-season workouts. So they haven't necessarily been like, it's just workouts. And it looks a lot different when you start putting on more pads each and every practice.
Yep, and then you finally get to the scrimmages, and I don't think that's for 2.5 weeks until they get to the first one. So your 2 scrimmages in summer camp are where you can find some separation with the position battles because it's more of like game simulation. They'll get there, but there is good competition in a lot of positions, which will be fun to monitor.
Yeah, I spent most of the day, most of the 45 minutes we were allotted to watch practice at the start, watching quarterbacks, watched a little offensive line, watched the tight ends get worked in with the offensive line. And then just kind of put up my camp, pitched my tent, and watched defensive back work because there's so many new guys in that defensive back room. Ray Williams, Chris Sheeran, Jordan Taylor. You got Chase Regan and KJ Flo. You have
Spence.
Terrence Spence. I'm trying to go without looking at my sheet. But I'm missing some corners. Ja'Kai Young. We're missing more.
That's most of them. It's a lot of guys. I also thought it was kind of funny how he's like, secondary looks a lot different. It's like, yeah. Like you brought in maybe 4 starting level players in the spring. So it's crazy different, I think, from what it looked like during spring practices. Yeah,
and they looked pretty solid. I mentioned the ball skills maybe not all the way there, but I mean, there's a reason they're playing cornerback, not necessarily wide receiver. So as long as they can break up the pass and they can cover a wide receiver, I'm not too upset. Safeties looked pretty good on day one. Anthony DeMichael, the safeties coach.
Yeah.
Insane person. Just an insane coach. Just running around, screaming, yelling, having a good time. He was, I think, more sweaty than the players.
They got to put a catapult on him. Make sure he doesn't get his vitals too high.
No, that would be something. But overall, the room looked really good. Talked about that with Bob Chesney post-practice as well.
We were looking, well, I mean, we got through the end of spring and said D-line and DBs were some areas that we needed. So added a couple, really good defensive linemen and a bunch of really good DBs. We, I think, got 5 every single position plus another, and so 2 corners, 2 safeties, a nickel, and then even another in there. And I think that was very important for us. And those guys certainly showed up today. And that's important just because of the depth we lost and the young guys that take a little bit more time. So these guys have played meaningful football snaps, and that's really important that we added that.
My favorite part of that answer is the quote, the depth we lost. Like, yeah, that is a reason why you go out and you pick up some guys in the portal.
Lost a lot of guys. I also think he did a very polite coach speaky way of being like, we went into the spring. We wanted to see what the young guys had. We went through the spring. We brought in 4 veteran defensive backs, which kind of tells you what you need to know, where he's talking about like they need a little more time, where I think he probably likes some of the young talent at corner, safety, nickel, whatever. But like maybe he doesn't like it starting against Charlotte, North Carolina, right? Maybe he likes it toward the end of a season. Maybe he likes it in 2025. So I think that was kind of telling, even though he said it in a very polite way, that like, yeah, we needed help.
Yeah, I that's a great way to put that, because you're coming into the fall, if they hadn't gone out and gotten those spring transfers, with Jacob Thomas, an underclassman, DJ Barksdale, an underclassman, question marks at cornerback 2, at nickel corner, at rover, whatever type of defense they're playing. And you got question marks across there. The only real stud that you had was Chauncey Logan, coming off of maybe his worst of his 2 years, arguably. Yeah. And so that, yeah, if you're head coach Bob Chesney sitting there and you're Lyle Hemphill and you're like, okay, what do we got to do? We got to fix this. And he said you went out, you got veterans with a lot of starts under their belt. You got that in Sheeran, Ray Williams, Ja'Kai Young, Terrence Spence. Those 4 guys will likely be big time contributors this year.
Yeah, it's just guys who have played a lot of football, right? I think they're all FCS or D2 guys, but they've all played, or I guess except for Sheeran, right, with UConn. So they've played at all these different schools, and they played a lot of snaps. Some of them a lot of different positions. Like Sheeran and Williams can kind of move all over, which I think is really valuable. Taylor, you mentioned,
Ja'Kai
has the
Young
great.
too.
Yeah, Ja'Kai Young can go all over. Taylor has the crazy speed. Spence is also like a special teams wizard, like multiple block punts in his career. Go ahead.
Okay, he's talked a big game about special teams, right?
Uh-huh.
I've never seen. Also, I haven't been to a lot of football training camps. Mostly soccer's are my background, but started doing special teams drills within 15 minutes of the first day of camp. Whistled, everyone came together. They did punt return coverage.
I like that. I like the early specials. You got to emphasize the specials and make it kind of nuts. UVA did a nice job with Bronco Mendenhall of doing some really competitive special team stuff that they would show us, kicking and punting, punt return, but like kicking, I don't think they were kicking many field goals without Bronco Mendenhall within like 10 steps of the kicker to add a little bit of pressure when they had competitions and stuff. Fascinating stuff to try to really create that pressure that some of those guys feel. I wonder what they're going to do, because I really have no idea what Jamie might do at returner this year. That's one that I'm interested to see, because I know Chesney values special teams. Who are your guys that return kicks, and do you have sort of a creative punt block thing? You can get some stuff created.
Yeah, I'm not sure they even know who their returners are going to be, because they had like 6 or 7 guys catching the punts, like fake the return. So not a lot of guys. Speaking on the kicks and field goals, whenever the field goal kickers went to kick, he would have the offense and the defense stand, one on the goal line, one like 10 yards behind him, and just watch them kick.
That's good, yeah.
And then at the end of the practice, they all scrummed the kicker, gave him just enough space to have him kick, but they were yelling and cheering and going crazy, and that's how the practice finished.
Love that. So they are, simulating some of that competition and pressure, right? I think that's what Chesney talks about when he says, like, testing them in fire. I think that would probably be an example. The other thing from your quote about, or Chesney's quote about defensive line and secondary being areas they needed to bring guys in the portal, the transfer from Colorado and Maine, is listed as a linebacker. He said a bunch of times in the spring they brought in a couple of very good defensive linemen. The only other guy listed as a defensive lineman is Chris Fitzgerald, the Youngstown State defensive tackle, which tells me that they view Mans actually as a defensive lineman who's listed as a linebacker. But
I should have gone over the defensive line and see if Mans was there, but I was so focused on the defensive backs and quarterbacks today. My apologies.
I think that's quite fair. But no, I think that's an interesting one, just because he kept saying we brought in a couple defensive linemen, and I kept like racking my brain. I was like, who's the second? But I think it's probably Mans. And also,
who is
not that it's hard, but good that the head coach has a pretty accurate judgment of like holes, because that in the spring we were like, oh my God, like you probably want some DBs. I didn't think he was going to bring in like 4 in the spring.
Would you hear his part in his quote? He's like, yeah, we've got like 2 guys at every position now, like 1 extra. And it's like, oh, okay.
Deepest JMU football team ever, I think. But
very much so. And Cignetti won a lot of games. I think his oversight was maybe trying to see like, oh, we have a gap here and fixing that. Like, gap last year may have been offensive line depth. And that was on display quite early when Kidwell goes down and Tyshawn Wyatt goes down within like the first month of the season. You could also have maybe said that he had an oversight on safeties last year, going into the year, going, I have full faith that Cheese Surratt is going to be my punt returner and my starting safety. Maybe didn't go the best for him. Also, he may have a blind spot in quarterbacks, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, I do think Cignetti would have been fascinating this year, right? If he had third year at the FBS level, if that like elite depth would have come in, but it's clearly, I think, closer to being where it needs to be with Chesney. So they've got depth at every position. I think if there's any position I'm still a little questionable on, it's maybe defensive line.
I don't think so. I've
still got some questions there, even though I know that he likes the guys he has.
Okay. What's your questions for defensive line?
I think the starting unit, so the way I view the starting unit is Eric O'Neal, the Long Island transfer who had like 20 plus tackles for loss last year in the FCS.
Your
Terry
favorite
Lockett.
transfer.
Terry Lockett's starting games at Syracuse, right? Then you've got Emmanuel Bush, who's added a bunch of weight in on the inside, former Marshall transfer. And then I think on the other end, you probably have Lloyd Summerall, who played at USF in Florida. And it's just really athletic. I love that group. And then I have more questions as you get a little bit deeper down the depth chart. I think my fear would be a guy like O'Neal or Bush go down. And I think they have certainly bodies to replace them. I just think the drop off in production could go from like all conference stud to more of like a solid player, I guess. So I fear a little bit that the depth could be a bit of a concern. But last year, I think they were kind of fortunate that they didn't have any crazy injuries until later in the year because they were not deep at all on the defensive line.
That's a good point. Defensive tackle, you got Amar Thomas and Chris Fitzgerald.
I think Thomas is on the end. He's like 250.
That's right.
But they have the youngsters. It's like Michael McMullen,
Daryl
Deneau, both really talented. So you have guys in there. I guess they're just more like question marks where it could be the same as the James Carpenter situation where it was a question mark and they turn out to be, super.
He's still too small.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to work in the Big Ten.
Famous last words. All right. Anything else you want to talk about with camp before we head to listener questions?
Do you have any major questions still coming in? I know you talked about the running game and secondary were things you were interested in. Are you a little more confident now after day one of camp?
No.
I think that's
day
fair.
Day one of camp really doesn't like tell you anything. Like I got home and Eva's like, "So what'd you see?" And I was like, "Nothing."
Yeah.
And she was like, "What do you mean?" And it's just like they don't really do much on day one. They're really, the energy is way up here, but they do's way down here. I mean, it's just warm-ups and some light drills. They're getting hyped. They're going as hard as they can. Coaches are jumping up and down, going crazy. The guys are going crazy, but you just don't see a lot. They're not running, sorry, there was a car going by my window and I thought it was thunder and I was about to scream. They're not running like their plays. They're not really doing it. It's like against air. And so you just don't know. Anyone can look good in gym shorts and a helmet on.
Agreed. Very Signetti-esque with that quote. I also don't know exactly how scrimmages work in terms of how open they are, but I do remember.
I believe they're fully open.
We like that. When Brian Shore had, sorry, go ahead.
I said that I'm going to one of them.
Well, there you go.
The second one.
Brian Shore had the famous quarterback battle with Connor Mitch, as we all remember, toe to toe the whole way. And obviously Shore won. But that first scrimmage, I believe it was, like first drive, he was like 5 for 5 for 50 yards and a touchdown and just operated the offense to perfection. It was like, oh, like he's head and shoulders above anybody else.
Who was calling that a competition again?
Some idiot at the Breeze. Some fool. And then last year's scrimmages, I guess Barnett would have been the star though. So who knows? But I think you'll start to see some separation at key positions in the scrimmages, especially like when you get, instead of out of that one-on-one like receiver DB, when you get them running routes like within the offense or guarding guys within the defensive scheme, you start to kind of see who fits best together, which is pretty important too.
Yeah, you see everything you said, scrimmages, and when the pads come on.
Yep.
That's like the other point of practice where you're like, oh, he hits different.
Physical sport.
Like that sounds like he's a Power 5 player. Oh.
They got some guys. They got some Power 5-esque players.
Yeah, but the questions I still have are the 3 questions I wrote about. I'm really curious to see how this running game comes together between the offensive line and the completely revamped running back room. Interested to see how Dylan Morris can fill Jordan McLeod's shoes, because as much as JMU fans want to hype up Dylan Morris, and for good reason, he is filling the defending Sunbelt Offensive Player of the Year shoes. Dylan Morris is coming his last full year as a starter. He had a career low in averages per pass. He had a 14 touchdown to 13 interception season. He's coming off of between his 2 years, his worst of the 2 years. Now, he did sit behind Michael Penix Jr. for 2 years. He worked with Kalen DeBoer. He worked with Ryan Grubb, two great offensive minds. And the rest of that coaching staff that is all at Alabama now, essentially, and Ryan Grubb is an NFL offensive coordinator. So you got to imagine just by osmosis, some of that was soaked up. But I still got questions. And I want to see it in action. And then my third one is the secondary. I got some answers on the secondary today, but I want to see them with pads on. I want to see them defending the ones. I want to see them against this offense.
I totally hear you there. I'm slightly more excited about the secondary, given the fact that like the way he described them flying around made it seem like they're like they kind of know what they're doing more than what was happening in the spring, which is at a bare minimum is good to be like, all right, maybe there's some guys who've played a lot of football and kind of get the whole deal.
Yeah, I definitely think that is the case. I mean, maybe I'm just excited about Ray Williams because I had that interview with him that you can find on our YouTube channel. But I think Ray Williams is going to be a game changer back there.
Yeah, he's good.
I think Sheeran's going to be really good back there. Maybe I'm just too high on that spring defensive back class because I just wanted them to bring someone in. They brought 4 in, and you're like, yes.
They brought in some guys. Yeah, and I guess Spence wasn't – I don't think he was in the spring haul. Like, I feel like he committed in the winter
fall,
but wasn't there in the spring. So I guess that would make it like 5. I mean, they brought in arguably just like you could make a starting group of those 5 and be like, this is respectable. So that's a good haul.
Yeah, and Jordan Taylor, man. Keep an eye on Jordan Taylor.
I do love the guys that we don't know anything about, right? D2, so it's like no one's ever watched this guy play. No one has any idea about it. Like Terrence Spence, you can find some stuff online. You're familiar with Holy Cross. Like you may have even watched a FCS playoff game and seen him in it. But like the D2 guy with like
I might go scrubbing.
Stats are.
I might go scrubbing for some Tusculum film.
I like that because he had a couple good years there. Some impact years.
He's got some ball skills, man. If he can catch, that's something that secondary wasn't doing a lot of last year.
That's sort of Lyle Hempel's thing, right? Is he wants a secondary that's able to create a bunch of turnovers. So yeah, you better bring in some new guys because that was not a strength last year at all.
Exactly. So keep an eye on him. Be fun. All right. You want to move to listener questions?
Let's do it.
All right. Drum roll, please. All right, that's a disgusting drum. I think I got a little spit on my face there. Bill Papp, guest from last week, Bill Papp at bottom_9. With the recent NCAA change to allow additional scholarships, any idea if JMU will add the extra 20 in football? And what impact will that have on the entire department costs? Will they add all allowable across the board, etc.? At what point does a decision on this need to be made?
I don't know that they've announced sort of the intention yet on that. The way athletic director Matt Rohn is speaking is that they want to keep up with the big players in college sports, which make me think they try to maintain at least some increase in scholarships. I also don't think there's like a deadline because you don't have to reach the limit. Like you could still offer 85 scholarships. I think it's like a roster limit. Like the idea would be there would be 105 spots in the roster or something.
And you could scholarship all of them.
And you could scholarship all of them, but you could do 90 and 15 walk-ons or something, I believe. So I don't know if they've said yet. So it's kind of hard to know exactly what the impact will be. And then if there's more realignment, that impacts everything, certainly. Pretty good drum roll.
Yeah, I don't think we've. Yeah, you probably have a lot more knowledge on that than I do.
I think it's a little early there, but I don't know how much it'll change things.
Daniel Merriman said, what do you think of Dylan Morris's throwing motion?
This one's for you.
That thing, so he gets it, and I don't know if I'm supposed to be going this far in depth with what can and can't be said about Dylan Morris's throwing motion.
So a lot of it's public, right? He's thrown passes for Pac-12 teams.
He like, if you're a podcast listener, I'm sorry because I can't describe this. He like bends his wrist and it rotates and flicks like boom, boom.
It does look a little different, like the way it comes out, almost like Drew Breesy on like the Washington tape.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting. It gets there, and it gets there in a hurry. Billy
He's got some
Atkins
power, yeah.
throws it like this, like at an angle.
A downward angle.
Alonzo Barnett throws it like this. Pew!
Barnett's got a cannon. Watching him in warm-ups is one of the most like it came out of that rain delay, and I was like, whoa.
Alonzo, I am actually, not to get fully on a tangent here about the future of Alonzo Barnett. If he stays, I think there's a good chance that he is then his starter for his last 2 years at JMU as a redshirt junior and a redshirt senior.
I think he wins the backup job this year.
I hope, because the fact that he started at QB1 and ended as like QB4 is asinine.
I also think Chesney's similar to like Signetti was better for DiNucci than Houston was. I think Chesney and Dean Kennedy would be better for Barnett than Signetti was. Like, I don't think Chesney's going in a post-game presser saying he got the yips. Maybe.
Could you imagine? First game, Chesney goes, so you know how a golfer sometimes just forgets how to hit the ball? And we're like, what? Again? Daniel said, who looked bigger than you expected?
That's a good question.
Joby Mallory.
Bigger than you expected, even?
Yes. Dude is a tank. Dude is Jesse Ramel, also massive human. McMurtry, also massive.
Yeah.
He makes the rest of the offensive line look small.
Offensive line is big. I saw a video. I guess JMU posted a video. Lloyd Summerall's big, too. Like, I knew he was big. He's tall.
He's my height.
He's 6'6".
Summerall?
Yeah. Summerall's taller than you. Go back to back. Go back to back with Summerall. You see him in practice, ask to go back to back.
Maybe I was on actually, now that I think of it, I think I was on an incline.
See? He's as tall as you want it when he's on a decline.
So that's my B. That's my B. Devin Watts at Philly fan 912. With the ACC saying they no longer, is this the question that
this
got you?
This is the one I wrote about, basically, yeah.
All right. So can I poke holes in yours that you wrote about?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I don't think any North Carolina school will play us.
Why is that?
Because they have this thing in their own state government, I believe, where they have to play in-state schools. So that's why Duke went to Charlotte 2-3 years ago in the 2021 season. That's why they play each other. That's why App and UNC have had these like home and home series. North Carolina, they may have changed that law, but for a while, there was that law. So
I don't know if they mandated it. I know they proposed it. I don't know that they actually got it through successfully. But either way, Duke has one of the years, next year, Duke plays Tulane and UConn. So I think Duke checks out to me.
Okay.
Because those are two G5s, neither in the state of North Carolina. They go to Middle Tennessee this year.
Great point. Great. Okay, these are good points. You're poking holes in me poking holes.
That's also a silly one. Like, I get why the ACC wants them to not play at Middle Tennessee or at Tulane, where they're probably going to be a dog next year, especially if Summerall's still there. So, like, the ACC, but the ACC is more of a recommendation. What's that?
Lloyd?
No. Floyd Summerall transfers to Tulane with an extra year that he somehow gets. It would change everything. But they have they basically said F you to the ACC's recommendation of not playing road G5 games, which is a recommendation. It's not like a mandate. So a bunch of teams have. The ACC makes the most sense from like a regional perspective. So Duke was one I had on there. I had UNC, which is less likely. 2027, if you're looking at like the years, JMU's got a bunch of openings that year. That would be a year that makes sense. Also, probably the fringe of where I can get excited about the first Power 5 coming to Bridgeforth. If we're talking like 2031 or something, like call me in 4 years and then it's exciting. But if it's like your 9th year in the FBS, it's less exciting. So 2027, Duke's got some openings. I believe they've got Notre Dame at home that year. So maybe they're willing to go to a G5 and a close drive. UVA also makes a ton of sense.
UVA makes too much sense, but are they following the recommendation?
2020 this year they play at Coastal, and then in 2028 they're playing at ODU. So not really. And also, like, I feel like the bottom of the ACC, like UVA, Duke football. I listed Georgia Tech, which maybe has a higher ceiling. You're not a real team. Like, You don't have to fully live up to ACC expectations. I think that's kind of why Duke does it. Is like we're gonna build our schedule. It's gonna be competitive, and we're gonna try to make a bowl game. So if UVA leans into that same thing, we're like, we're never going to the playoff. Let's just play a game where our fans would be interested. There's like a little rivalry there. They're only an hour apart. That one makes too much sense. So I think those are a couple. And then West Virginia has some openings, I think, in 2028. They're not afraid of playing G5 road games. Also, the Big 12 seems just a little less snobby than the other power leagues right now, where the ACC is like, oh, God forbid we play, a G5
James
road
Madison.
game. Yeah, even though they're capable of beating these ACC teams. And then the Big 10 and the SEC, if you're going to get one of those teams, it's going to be one of the worst teams in the conference.
Vanderbilt.
And even then, I think Vandy hasn't played a lot of road G5 games. I was looking at their futures. And a lot of those schools have schedules kind of built out pretty thoroughly, where it looked like maybe Duke and Virginia, West Virginia are a couple of likely ones. And shout out to WHSV, which did report the JMU is trying aggressively to get a home game against a power conference team.
Let me throw a follow-up question to Devin's question to you.
Oh, yeah.
Would you be upset as a fan if they got like a low-level Power 5 school outside of UVA? Like UVA, there's the regionalness of it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Would you be kind of like, no, like a Power 4, let's go. And then they're like, this weekend at Bridgeport, coming to town is UCF.
I would be okay. I think that would be hype. It would be funny if it was one of the recent non-G5s, like a UCF.
Memphis. Wait, they're still in the American. Never mind.
But if they move up, maybe you get or something. I think it would still be interesting. But even then, UCF probably more exciting than Duke. But playing a team like a Duke or a UVA or a West Virginia, where they're probably not playoff realm, so you could win the game, I think would be really cool. You're guaranteed a crazy crowd. I mean, if it's UVA, that'd be perfect.
We could win any game, anywhere, anytime.
Any place, anytime, yeah. But UVA would be perfect. Duke would be cool. Those are a couple that kind of stood out. But I also understand why it's a challenge for them to get teams when conferences are don't do this.
It's kind of a shame that we have the same issue in football as we do in basketball, where it's like, oh, you're really good. Congratulations. Here's your payment of not being able to play anyone good.
I think so. NC State was supposed to play. It was either, I think it's next year. They were supposed to play App.
And they canceled it. Sorry.
You see they replaced it with?
UVA in a non-conference game.
That's silly. That's very silly. App State's got a better program than UVA does. The idea that you're trying to bolster your reputation, a loss last year to UVA on the road is way worse than a loss to JMU and Bridgeport. So that's what doesn't make sense to me. There's enough advanced metrics now between SP Plus and ESPN's Football Power Index, Sager ratings, all these things that whatever made up perception you have in your head of losing to a G5, I think you should throw it out the window, because if that team's ranked the way they will be and with some of those power metrics, that's a better win if you get it on the road than it would be than beating a UVA or some of these other Power 5 teams. Silly.
I agree. All right. Zachary Baker, what position group stood out the most on day one? As I said, I focused primarily on quarterback and defensive back just because selfishly that's what I wanted to watch.
Fair.
I'd say defensive back out of the two stood out more because I went in with the bar pretty close to the floor and they jumped over that. Ball skills were really great from Chauncey Logan, from Jordan Taylor. Deflection skills were really good for the rest of the crew.
We like that.
Nathan, how do you think we would use Mallory and Petaway when we have a day?
That's a good question.
Day. Yeah, day.
Chesney had a quote. I think it's something about media day where he's you have to have running back by committee because it's so physical. It's such a physical position. You want to split reps to keep your guys fresh and stuff. So my guess is that a day is probably the guy. Petaway and Mallory, I think, make sense as complementary pieces, and they're very different. Petaway is really shifting fast, and Mallory's a more physical runner. So I think they complement him pretty perfectly. So my guess is they just split carries between those three, and maybe it goes toward a day. But he also, I don't know that he ever had 20 plus carries in his North Texas career. If he did, it was only like once. So he's not going to be a guy getting like 32 carries a game. He might get like 14, and then you could do another like 10 or 5 to 7 for the other two, and you're getting closer to 30 carries or whatever.
Let me Google something real quick. I should have had this prepared. About Io.
They've
last
also
year
got
with North Texas.
they've also got Purdy and Wayne Knight. So they have a ton of like if you're looking to
Wayne Knight has entered the portal.
if you're looking to spread out the carries, they've got pretty easy ability to do that. And then they kind of have some receivers who are sneaky fun potentially in the running game, especially your guy Dollison, who I'm not saying they're going to line him up at running back, but like jet sweep kind of stuff with Dollison or even Cam Ross, but then Ymir Knight, some possibilities there. So they can get very creative with who they give carries to, I think.
So Io last year led the team in yards per attempt and net total yards.
Mm-hmm.
And he only had 20 more carries than the next closest in Oscar Attaway the third. So
how many carries do you have all year?
143 carries in 12 games.
See, that's not that many.
So that's my long-winded roundabout way of saying like he wasn't their workhorse back last year. They were pretty nearly 50% split at North Texas. So I wouldn't be shocked to see, a 50% or less, maybe a 40, maybe even a 33% split between the three of them. Maybe Mallory gets a little bit less, 25%. Now I'm trying to do mental math with it all. And then they replace the remaining 75% between the two of Petaway and Io, maybe more of a lean to Io. I'm getting way too deep into the mathematics, but I think you'll see a healthy dose of all of them.
Yeah, agreed.
Synogs, what's the day one hottest, most overblown take?
What do you got? You were at camp.
Mainly because I've been high on them all podcast. Jordan Taylor will have 5 interceptions and be first team all Sun Belt.
I like that one. Yes. An early
clip it. Mark this down. The July 31st episode at the 53rd minute, Jack makes his call because when that comes true, we got to clip it. We've never clipped our right calls before.
I know. We need to step up when it comes to that.
All right. Danny Wood, how did JC Evans look? Like a freshman. He has the raw ability. His throwing motion looks a lot better than it did in high school. He's got some work to do, but he has the potential to be very good, and he is a tall and fast quarterback that fits what we've seen out of Chesney these last few years.
He's got that Matt Sluka vibe to him.
Joey Needham, who is one freshman you see making a big contribution this year, can be redshirt or true.
This was a great question. Tough answer.
I love this question.
I think if I have to go, you could go with some of the DBs are probably a smart answer. I'm going to go with the two redshirt freshmen. I know you're probably not supposed to give 2. The 2 redshirt freshmen, or it's actually 3 really.
Oh my
tackles.
Goodness. Who's the one? Who's the one? Bennett goes, all right, here's my 3.
I'll go with Michael McMullen, who we talked about earlier. Redshirt freshman defensive lineman in the interior, 6'1", 285. I think he's got a chance to break into the rotation in the middle. I think he's really talented. Newport News guy. They also, again, have Daryl Deneau. And then I think one of the other younger, DJ Cotton Jr. is a redshirt freshman who was a preferred walk-on at West Virginia and transferred in. He's got some nice size and talent too. But McMullen, I think, has a lot of game. He had a sack in the spring game. So I'll pick McMullen kind of working his way in on the middle of the defensive line.
I'm going to go Evan Spivey, the redshirt freshman cornerback.
That's a good one.
Evan Spot. He was getting a lot of pub, spring games, spring practice, redshirt freshman. I think and that is a position group where there is potential to really stake your claim and just find your spot and not let go of it. I know we talked about this on the roster breakdown podcast a few weeks ago. Samson Ogande.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is that how you pronounce his last name?
That sounds correct.
Can't wait for the pronunciation guide. When the first pronunciation guide drops, it's going to be like Christmas. I forgot that he beefed up to 308.
He's a big dude.
Was he that big?
He came in as an edge. He was like 240.
Okay, that's what I thought.
It's crazy.
Nathan has another one for you. He's got two more for you.
Oh, wow.
This one's specifically for you.
Okay.
This one is for Bennett. Will he do the halftime Pepsi race?
Is the halftime Pepsi race like no, it's not the lobster race. Or is it the lobster food race?
I think this is in reference to the lobster race.
I'd be willing. I'm familiar with mascot races. I'd be willing. You're going to be hard pressed to get me to commit to a scripted race, though.
You want to go? You want to go?
Put me in, and I'm just running to the end.
Just dead.
So sprint. I don't know who you want to win. I don't know who you want to be the winning food, but like you better put me in that one because I'm not messing around with any scripts.
Could you imagine if you're just running dead sprint down the field, you get caught from behind, and like you're in lobster, and they just send someone to take you out?
That'd be pretty sweet.
Have you ever seen lobster win?
Yes.
Once,
right? It was against Maine. They made it cute.
Yep, family weekend.
Yeah. What did they give out? Because it wasn't
lobster rolls.
They did do lobster rolls. Wow, that's good prep by them. That's good prep by everybody involved with that.
And it was really good.
Yeah, that's a funny one.
I think they were like $5 lobster rolls or something like that.
That's a steal.
It was my sophomore year, I want to say. Yeah. So you're junior because you're so old.
Yeah, I was probably in the booth.
You were probably in the retirement home because you were so old.
That's right. I did go to a retirement home my junior year.
Did Chase Regan look as fast as in an old interview? Oh, because Ben was really hyping up his speed. Talked a lot about that with his interview with Chase on our YouTube. You didn't get a lot of straight line speed in this practice. He looked solid in the drills.
They want to camp.
You don't get a lot.
Camp's the toughest time of the year for me because it's so close. It's so close,
but like so far.
Yeah, and a lot of it, you'll get a lot of fluff. Chesney did a nice job with some legit answers today, but it gets a little fluffy. I hope he names names in the middle of the camp and is like, this guy's a stud. That's the kind of stuff that I really like.
Day one of camp is also like, you're so excited because it's finally here, but then you're like, wait, it's not really here.
It's still a full month until game day, yeah.
And also, like, the coaches, they don't know. They have an idea, but like they don't know. And so you're saying they're like, I want to know all the information about this team. And they're like, so do I.
Right. There's a lot left to determine, especially when some of those guys, especially in the secondary, just arrived for practices. So like they haven't actually seen them in a JMU uniform in their practice session. So it's a lot of new faces that got to work in.
A lot of new faces. Well, that was a good voice crack. Heard from a JMU spokesperson that we may have a pronunciation guide on the way before next pod. Big time stuff. Bennett, anything else before we get up on out of here?
I don't think so, man. Day one of camp. It's in the books. We're excited about that. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe. We want those likes. We want those subscriptions.
Yeah, check us out. If you like and subscribe, if you subscribe to the podcast, you'll never miss when we drop a new interview. Today, we dropped the interview with Josiah Persinger.
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Yeah, I think, it's like Persinger. I asked him to do it right before, and then I swear I butchered it seconds later, like before we hit record. And then I was
you did have the opening was hilarious because you start it by going, welcome in Josiah Persinger to the program.
Yeah,
like,
for some reason I wasn't
like
feeling saying
Johnny
podcast.
Carson.
It made it seem like I was welcoming him to either that or it was like, welcome to the program. You're a Duke.
Too, but if you subscribe, you'll never miss one of those. So we had him on today, or we'll potentially have a few other class of 2025 commits. You can find all of our podcast clips and some exclusive breakdowns. Breon Penny was the most recent breakdown. I think we're underselling him. I think we're underselling Penny. Could be wide receiver 1. I don't think you give it to Taji right here, right now. I think Penny has something to say about that wide receiver 1 position.
I also, two last notes, did not realize Jesse Ramel's family was that athletic.
Really?
All of his sisters have played like D1 basketball. He has a brother who's a starting, or I think he's starting. He at least plays. Well, actually, don't quote me on that. But he plays offensive line at Michigan State. And he has a younger brother, class of 2026, who the Dukes are recruiting, who plays defensive end.
Huh.
So I thought that was interesting. The Dukes are also recruiting, I learned this today, a 2025 quarterback, the son of John Kitna. He's between like UAB and JMU.
Isn't he like a 4-star too?
Yeah, he's like 3 or 4 stars. I guess he had a good relationship with the last staff, but seems to have really clicked with Chesney and company. But his brother plays for UAB, so maybe he goes to U. But good player.
Did Kitna and Dilfer ever play together? I feel like Kitna and Dilfer played together too.
They definitely, at the very least, they know each other, which I think is helping. So UAB sounded like it could be the leader based on like an ESPN article about him. But he's basically down right now between JMU and UAB. But he doesn't want to commit, it sounded like, before the season. So they can make a push for him. I would anticipate JMU has a better year than UAB, which might help.
This is great podcasting right now. I just have to confirm that John Kitna and Trent Dilfer did not play on the same team. I thought they both played on the Seahawks.
Kitna was a Lion for a bit.
Kitna was a Lion for a bit. He started his career with the Seattle Seahawks from 96 to 2000, and then Dilfer joined the Seahawks in 2001.
Okay.
Just in case anyone was curious about early 2000s, late 90s mediocre quarterback play.
There you go. The more you know.
Nathan, yes, John Kitna's son. Yes. I forget what his name is, but he's pretty solid quarterback.
Let me find it.
This is great, man. This is what everyone stays for. We had a really
Jameson, but he goes by JT.
JT Kitna.
Yeah. Good name.
JT Kitna. This was a really nice, tight 1 hour podcast. And now the end, we're rambling a little bit. But yeah, subscribe to the podcast. If you want to sponsor the JMU Sports News podcast or get any advertising on our website, jmusportsnews.com, or have any advertising in our newsletter, give us an email at jmusportsnews@gmail.com. You can also head to our website, scroll down to the bottom, click the advertising tab, and that will send you to a form that you can fill out, and we'll get that and get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. That's pretty much immediately because we got a lot of time on our hands.
That's exactly right.
Anything else we got to add? I know that's the 15th time I've asked that.
I think we're good. I think we'll follow up on the Kitna saga as the season unfolds.
Is he still being recruited by Indiana?
It sounded like Indiana contacted him in Signetti, and maybe he was just now all in on JMU and UAB. So, yeah, I think he wants to win a national title.
One more question for you. Who makes the college football playoff first, Indiana or the Dukes?
JMU.
Who makes the college football playoff first, Virginia Tech or the Dukes?
Oh. Tie. Both make it.
Both this year?
Both make it. Who knows what year, but they both make it this year or next year. They both make it.
Imagine if they make it.
They play each other.
They play each other.
They play each other in Blacksburg.
Or they tie. They have somehow get a tie. All right.
That'll be something.
Well, for Bennett Conlon, I'm Jack Fitzpatrick. Thank you so much for tuning in to the JMU Sports News Podcast presented by Bet Online. Be sure to like, rate, subscribe, do all of that wherever you're listening. You can also follow along with us on X/Twitter at JMU Sports News, and you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. We'll be back sometime next week, breaking down the second week of JMU football camp. Bennett, talk to you soon, man.